Deputy Speaker. I wanted to put some words on the record about this legislation. I'm deeply troubled by it and deeply concerned. You know, it's more than just disagreeing with the government. The government has brought in a number of policies that I can say with deep conviction that I'm actually embarrassed as a New Democrat that they've brought these policies forward, that they are cynical, unprincipled, pandering to the worst elements of Manitoba society, whether it's a gas tax holiday, whether it's a flip-flop for being opposed to a gas pipeline to Churchill, to now being an enthusiastic proponent for that, to keeping the tax cuts for the rich from the previous government, to now attacking our human rights in Manitoba. And I will be very clear. This legislation is racist legislation. It is deeply problematic that an NDP government would be pursuing this type of legislation. It just shows you how much the NDP have lost their way and are no longer a party of principle and now a one of opportunity and cynicism. Only a few short years, there are members on the other side, proud anti-racist activists who had dedicated their life to fighting this type of racist legislation, who are now going to cynically stand up and vote for legislation that will harm Manitobans. That will harm Manitoba.
Order. I'd like to remind all speakers to make sure we're keeping comments directly relevant to the Protective Detention and Care of Intoxicated Persons Act, and give a general caution to all members to be not hollering across. The member for Fort Garry.
Thank you. So let's just recap what is so problematic about this legislation. Under the current Intoxicated Person Detention Act, the government can hold somebody for 24 hours. Now, it doesn't say what they can hold them for. It's just somebody is intoxicated. Doesn't have to be meth or alcohol. It could be whatever substance that a police officer deems the person to be intoxicated for. Now, 24 hours is a magic number, because in Canada, when you get arrested by the police where they suspect you of a crime, you can only be held for 24 hours before you have the right to go before a magistrate or a judge and apply for bail. There is a reason why the Intoxicated Persons Detention Act, as it currently stands, uses that magic 24-hour number, because afterwards it becomes unconstitutional. You can't hold somebody legally for 72 hours, and keep in mind, these people have committed no crime. They have done nothing wrong. In Canada, you can be intoxicated. That is not a crime. It is not illegal. We are holding people who are not criminals, who have done nothing wrong other than scare a police officer or get on the radar of a police officer, and we'll talk a little bit more of that in a minute. The Chief Judge of Manitoba has said, and there is wide consensus in our community, that our criminal justice system is systemically racist. And what do they mean when they say that? It's not me saying it, it's the Chief Judge of Manitoba, and it is a number of provincial reports and commissions that have come to that conclusion, is that our justice system is not neutral. It doesn't apply equally to everyone, that there are certain members of our community who are disproportionately, punitively affected by our justice system. We have, for example, 20% population who is Indigenous. Our jails are 80% Indigenous. Our child welfare system is 90% Indigenous. We know the homeless population is overwhelmingly Indigenous. And that's what this law targets. That's who this law targets. It is targeting Indigenous Manitobans. It is targeting people who are poor, who are marginalized, who are vulnerable, who are at the lowest point in their lives and the most vulnerable. And instead of this government reaching out and providing assistance, they are criminalizing, they're demonizing, and they're demeaning them. They are taking them away from, whatever life they have, forcefully holding them, taken by force and arrest, and then held against their will in a locked facility that they cannot leave. They have committed no crime. Now, 24 hours of that is bad enough. 72 hours is ridiculous, and there's a provision in this law that allows them to even hold them longer if they're then taken to a hospital and admitted under the Mental Health Act, where there are no time limits. And it doesn't say in this law that it's just for meth. So somebody could come in intoxicated by alcohol and be held for 72 hours, and there's nothing in this law that would prevent that abuse from happening. You have, in this law, no right to a lawyer. So the police can scoop you off the streets. They can take you to a locked facility and hold you, and you cannot call anybody. You can't call anybody to get you out. And there's one of the provisions in this act is that if you are intoxicated, if somebody who's a sober adult can come to the facility and sort of check you out and say, I'll take care of you, you can get out earlier. But if you're not allowed even a phone call, who do you call? If you live alone and you're homeless and your home is the riverbank, who do you call? Middle-class people, when they get high and intoxicated, it's at a home. It's in private. This law will never touch them. This will never, ever affect them. It is designed to go after the people that don't have those type of middle-class privileges and protections, the people that have to get high in public, that don't have the luxury of doing it behind closed doors where nobody sees it. And again, this law, it doesn't center the patient. Any suggestion otherwise is gaslighting. This centers the police. It centers a government who hasn't really done anything on addictions and mental health. And this centers a very scared public that wants government to do something, so they do, but not this. This is going to create more harm than it will actually solve. This is going to be directed at our most vulnerable, our weakest members, and they will be overwhelmingly BIPOC. And keep in mind, this is all about unchecked discretion. So a police officer thinks you're intoxicated and they pick you up. You're not tested, they have no medical training. How do they know if you're intoxicated? And they can hold you for 72 hours, and somebody in a detention facility, again, maybe is a paramedic, but has very little training. They're not going to test you. They don't take a blood sample. And they hold you until they say you can go. And there's no review. So if you're wrongfully picked up, if you're wrongfully held for 72 hours, you have no legal means to go before a judge and say they made a mistake. And if they do abuse your rights and illegally hold you or pick you up to begin with, this law prevents you from suing the government and getting a remedy and redress from the government. This is so chillingly Orwellian. This is something you would see in an authoritarian country elsewhere that we would roll our eyes about, that it wouldn't call themselves a democracy. And it's not like other Canadian jurisdictions haven't done this kind of thing before. They have. And when they did, it went to court. And what do you think happened when it went to court? These laws were struck down. They are unconstitutional. Now, the government says, well, the reason why we have to do this is that we have to get care to these people. Now, that's an interesting argument because it is completely disingenuous. To begin with, I'll use the example of the safe consumption site because they've argued the exact opposite for the safe consumption site. My friends on the PC benches say, hey, we can't have safe consumption site because you're promoting drug use. Why don't you use those resources and put them into treatment? Well, my friends on the NDP benches will say, hey, wait a minute, that's not realistic. You can't force treatment on people. They may not be ready. And 500 people a year die from preventable overdoses in Manitoba. And we have to keep these people alive long enough that they get to the conclusion that they want help. And when they get there, we're ready for them and we'll help them. And that's a solid argument. And that makes a lot of sense. And then the government who makes that argument turns around and brings Bill 48, which does the exact opposite. It says, we are going to force treatment on you when you haven't consented and you haven't asked. Well, that's illegal. We don't do that in Canada. That's against the Constitution. You cannot force somebody to have treatment against their consent. And again, the premise is that everybody who's going to get arrested on this is an addict. Well, they're not. Oftentimes when police go to a situation and something's happening and nobody's actually committed a crime, but there's been a disturbance, the way they keep the peace is just round people up and take them to what used to be called the drunk tank. And this used to be called sort of drunk tank legislation. And you may have some, college student who's having a bad night who is not an addict and is going to be held for hours on hours in detention for whenever somebody in a position of power, which they have no ability to challenge or question, decides it's time for them to go home. That's a problem, because there's a lot of assumptions made here that aren't backed up, that police are going to use their discretion responsibly. I'll tell you, 26 years doing this kind of work, they don't. There are police officers who will abuse this section, who have abused this section, and will hold people for other reasons other than that they're intoxicated. And again, there are no safeguards, there's no protections, there's no way to prevent an abuse of people's civil rights under this section, and no remedy when they do. Then you're going to have problems with the people that actually staff these facilities by them using their discretion. When is somebody sober enough? If somebody starts protesting and is upset at being held, are they still drunk, or they're just upset for being held against their will? And if they protest, are they going to be kept longer than if they're just placid and passive and just accept their fate? Those type of abuses will happen, and they do happen every day in Winnipeg, and they will continue to happen. And what this legislation does, it will make it worse. You know, my friends on the other side have another disingenuous argument that this is somehow going to free up police resources because they say, well, we're waiting 10 hours at the hospital. Well, you have legislation right now that allows you to take somebody to the Intoxicated Persons Detention Act facility for 24 hours. So they're not using the law as it currently stands. So if they're not using the law as it currently stands, why do you need to expand it to 72 hours? That makes absolutely no sense, and it just shows you how abused this law will be. And the fact of the matter is, it won't be all Manitobans who experience that abuse. It will be our most vulnerable, it will be our most marginalized, it will be Indigenous and BIPOC members of our community. And there are no safeguards in place for any of this. The other issue, of course, is rural Manitoba. It is dangerous to hold people in custody. In every single custodial facility, people die. It is not a safe nor healthy environment. In fact, CBC did a report in 2021. They found there was 250 deaths in police custody in Canada over 10 years. Of those 250 deaths, 61 were so-called drunk tank deaths. These are not safe places to put people. The safest place for people are to be at home with their loved ones. The PAW, RCMP, that doesn't have one of these fancy protective cell centers, they used to hold 16 people in one cell. That was their facility. 16 people lying on the floor next to each other. Many of them wouldn't even have a mat or a blanket. And that was the facility that the PAW had open to it, and that's what they used to hold people for 24 hours. Imagine being there for 72. Well, the government said, well, hold on. You know, we need these special centers, and if the special center doesn't exist, then you can't hold them for 72. Well, wait a minute. I thought you said this was the meth crisis and that we needed this to solve the meth crisis. You're telling me there's only a meth crisis in downtown Winnipeg? Many small communities are dealing with methamphetamine and other serious drugs. Many small First Nations have pretty significant drug problems. They will not have the money, the resources to have one of these fancy centers. So does that mean that those people aren't getting protected by 72 hours of forced treatment, and that we're only going to hold them for 24 hours? Why are you treating them differently than those in downtown Winnipeg? Well, the answer is because this really isn't about helping people, because there's so many contradictions with this legislation that this is really about political theater. This is really about a government that has done very little to support people with addictions and mental health issues. And this is a cover to basically go out in the world and say, yeah, you know what, we've been really bad on this and we made a lot of promises and we're not going to keep them. But look, you won't have to actually see, as the Premier would say, the person fighting with themselves walking down the street. And that's what this is about. This is about disappearing embarrassing Manitobans so that other Manitobans who vote don't have to be bothered by poverty and, you know, all the problems that go with it. A progressive government, an NDP government, would say, hey, wait a minute, we don't have to draw the curtains. We don't have to hide the problems of Manitoba society. What we do have is we have an obligation to fix them. We have an obligation to invest in Manitobans and put the policies in so that these individuals actually get help, actually are supported, and that we don't use the police to basically take people off the streets for 72 hours because we don't like the look at them. And, you know, it's quite ironic that, you know, this government says that they're compassionate towards homeless Manitobans and they want to do something for homeless Manitobans. That's who's going to get targeted by this bill. That's who's going to get disappeared off the streets and put into these facilities. And what little stability they had, when they get out, their whatever tent city they're living in, whatever personal effects they have, they're gone. They've been stolen. And these desperate people are going to have to start from scratch again. But this government isn't concerned about that because this is not about actually helping people. It's not about treating Manitobans who are struggling. It is about political optics. So, again, I can't reiterate enough that there's nothing in the current law that would prevent this government from doing what they claim they want to do. There's nothing in the current law that is going to prevent the police from sitting in a hospital for 10 hours with somebody. That is a huge red herring. They're choosing to do that right now. This law is not going to change any of that. And there's nothing in the current law that needs to be tweaked or fixed. And the fact of the matter is, this law isn't about methamphetamine. And that 72 hours will be for anything. Anything the police say that you were intoxicated on, and they do not have to prove it. They do not have to support what they say. It's their word, which is unchallenged, which you can't go to a judge and say, hey, this guy was wrong. And you can't have any sort of remedy at all if they have illegally detained you and kept you for 72 hours. But again, like I said, middle-class people will not get affected by this. Middle-class people will never, ever see the effects of this law. This is targeting our most poor and vulnerable and marginal people. This is a Canoe government punching down on Manitobans, and each and every one on that side should be absolutely ashamed. You have lost your way. This is a racist piece of legislation, and it cannot pass. Thank you.